Okay, this is the second lecture for inheritance part 2, where in this lecture we'll be focusing on gene interaction and epistasis. Right? So the first video would be to intro what is gene interaction and epistasis. Okay, so gene interaction is when we have more than one genes that interact, gene interaction, right? Interact together to influence or determine one particular phenotype. So this is a bit different from what you have learned so far, because what you have learned so far in inheritance part 1, even in part 2 for the autosomal linkage, what you have learned is that there are two genes which codes for two phenotypes, right? So one gene codes for one phenotype. For example, one gene for, say, hair color, the other gene for skin color, for example. Right? But for this particular part of inheritance part 2, we'll be looking at phenotypes that are determined by more than one genes. Okay, so one classic example is the shape of the comb seen in chicken. Okay, so you can see on the screen that there are two genes, gene R and gene P, which together determine the different shapes of the combs, right, in the chicken. Right, so two genes coding for one phenotype or one trait. Okay, and one particular type of gene interaction that we will be focusing in more would be epistasis. Right, so in epistasis, right, we are looking at how two genes interact to give one phenotype. We'll stick to two genes in the A-level syllabus, right? So it's still dihybrid, just that there is only one phenotype instead of two phenotypes. Okay, and the way that these two genes would interact is when one of the gene, known as an epistatic gene, would mask the expression of the other gene, known as a hypostatic gene. So what does this masking means, right? So let me give you a very simple example. Right, maybe we have one gene that codes for hair color, right, another gene that codes for baldness, right, or no lack of hair. Right, so when we express, or when the gene for baldness is expressed, there is no hair, right? So we don't see the hair color being coded for by the other gene, right? So you can have both genes, right, in the cell being expressed, both genes being transcribed, proteins being translated, but because of the lack of hair as a phenotype, you don't see the hair color expressed in the phenotype. Right? So this is what it means by masking, right? You only see the phenotype of one gene, not the phenotype of the other, due to the result of the expression of the other gene. Right? So again, because the gene for baldness is expressed, you don't see the expression of the gene for hair color, right, in the phenotype. So this is what it means by masking. Okay, so because of this masking effect, right, between the genes, the number of classes of phenotype would be fewer. Okay, so it will be clearer when we look at some of the examples in the next video. Okay, then you can see how the number of classes of phenotypes is fewer. Okay, so it's clearer in the next video. So KIV for now, all right. But a bit more to clarify, right? Because we use the term masking, which of course you have heard of before, or you have come across before previously when we talk about the dominant and recessive allele. Right? So they use the same term, right? So likelihood is some of you might be confused. Right? So I want to make it a bit clearer here that we are talking about two completely different things. When we talk about epistasis, right, we are talking about two genes, right? One masking the other, right? But for the dominant and recessive allele, right, they are talking about two alleles of the same gene. Right? So two genes versus like one gene, two alleles. Right? So it's like completely different. Okay? So for epistasis, again, it is one gene, epistatic gene, masking the hypostatic gene, which is very different from the dominant allele masking the recessive allele of the same gene, right? One gene only. Right? So again, two completely different things, even though we are talking about masking, not the same term, masking. Okay, so don't be confused between these two completely different things, right? Okay.